it's weird that it's that easy. Just throw some money around and people will change their culture.
Where I have a real problem is China now saying we're going to govern the way people talk about us outside of our soil, outside, beyond our borders.
In 2010, The Karate Kid, a movie about people in the US competing in a Japanese martial art, was remade in China. The Japanese karate instructor Mr. Miyagi was replaced with a Chinese kung fu instructor named Mr. Han, so it wasn't even about karate anymore. In 2012, a film called Looper was released, after being completely rewritten to appeal to the Chinese government.
That movie, in script form, had nothing to do with China. The future in that movie took place in France. If you've seen the movie, Bruce Willis has a wife in the future. That role was going to be a French woman. There was nothing about China in the film.
One of the major issues that Looper had was that time travel plots were banned in China because these were seen as disrespectful to history. So the producers devised a strategy to flatter the Chinese government by showcasing a future where China would be the most powerful nation in the world, and this was music to the ears of the Communist Party.
I'm going to France.
You should go to China.
I'm going to France.
I'm from the future. You should go to China.
I'm going to France. Go.
Later that year, a remake of the 1984 film Red Dawn was released. The 1984 film portrayed a surreal world where Soviet Russia had taken over the US. The remake replaced Soviet Russia with the Chinese. They went into meticulous detail into creating the decor and propaganda in the movie, and in many cases, it appeared very similar to real Chinese propaganda.
And I'll never forget, the producers of Red Dawn called and said, hey, can you come look at this movie? We have a problem with China. We need to figure out how to fix it. And I watched it and I was like, oh my God, you guys made China the enemy. Like, how do you do that and expect that to get into China? That makes no sense. And they're like, I know, we didn't even think about it. And I said, well, even worse, you know, it's going to blackball the studio from doing any business in China. And that's exactly what happened.
Being scared that the Chinese government would blacklist the studio entirely, they decided to digitally edit the film to make the enemy's North Korea instead. 5 special effects companies were brought in to fix the visuals and audio, and the release was pushed back by over a year. In April of 2013, the release of Iron Man 3 in China featured the addition of 4 minutes of extra footage. The scene included Chinese product placement, appearances by 2 famous Chinese actors, and a scene where Iron Man is saved by the brilliance of Chinese doctors. In June of 2013, World War Z was released. The book that the film is based on cites that the virus in the story originated from the military-led organ harvesting black market in China, but it was changed so that the virus originated from Russia instead.
Beijing censors are quick to edit or outlaw movies that criticize China, even in minor ways. For the movie World War Z, they had to cut the script's mention of a virus because it originated in China.
In 2014, Transformers 4 was released, and it was described by critics as a splendidly patriotic film for the Chinese Communist Party. At the time rife with protests in Hong Kong, which led to the arrest of over 500 citizens, the plot of the film was taken to China. It sported scenes of aliens attacking Hong Kong, followed by a scene of a sea captain calling upon the central government for help.
We gotta call the central government for help.
And the portrayal of Communist Party officials as hyper-competent devoted heroes which vowed sternly that they would protect Hong Kong. In 2015, The Martian was released. The film centers around a plot where Matt Damon and NASA are eventually saved by the Chinese National Space Agency.
Thanks to my Uncle Tommy in China, we got another chance at this.
In Marvel's 2016 release of Doctor Strange, the comic book character of a Tibetan monk called the Ancient One was replaced by a Celtic woman.
When challenged about this, a screenwriter explained that if you acknowledge that Tibet is a place and that he's Tibetan, you risk alienating 1 billion people.
In 2019, DreamWorks' Abominable was called out for depicting an image of China's 9-dash line map propaganda. In 2019, a trailer of the sequel to the famously patriotic film Top Gun aired. It was found that in the trailer, the Taiwanese and Japanese flags on the main character's jacket were changed into meaningless rectangles.
Yes. What was the problem? Was it the Japanese flag?
That's the Taiwanese flag, the red and blue. Yeah, the USS Galveston. See, it's...
Wow.
But that's what that's what makes it so scary, that they're able to pressure people to change their behavior from afar without no bullets. This is just
money.
What does it say to the world when Maverick is scared of the Chinese communists?
These are just a handful of cases of Chinese-related censorship and propaganda in films. A full list would be much more extensive, and preemptive self-censoring is making it harder and harder to notice.
But many more scripts never see the light of day because writers and producers know not to test the limits. Chinese government censors don't need to say a word because Hollywood is doing their work for them.
Equally as troubling is the number of Hollywood films being funded by China.
Increasingly, Hollywood also relies on Chinese money for financing. In 2018, films with Chinese investors accounted for 20% of the U.S. box office ticket sales, compared to only 3% 5 years earlier.
Vital Western values such as defiance against totalitarianism, the sanctity of human life, the belief in personal responsibility, and the belief in individual freedom have always been reinforced by the film industry. And the industry has been instrumental in holding our societies together as well as progressing them forward. For a long time, the foreign influence on Western films by authoritarian regimes was a null issue, but that's clearly not the case anymore. Chinese influence has gone from cutting scenes from completed films to preemptive self-censorship to outright propaganda.
The Chinese Communist Party spends billions and billions of dollars to mislead Americans about China and to try to shape what we see, what we hear, and think.
So how is it that Hollywood, once a stronghold for modern Western culture and morals, is slowly morphing itself into a propaganda machine for the Chinese Communist Party?
No one should underestimate the ingenuity and industry of the Chinese people. At the same time, no one should doubt that America made China's meteoric rise possible.
For better or for worse, film has long been a tool used to spread ideas as well as cultural values and morals. In China, the 1930s were referred to as the golden age of filmmaking. The first culturally significant films were produced at this time. Bugao's Spring Silkworm told the story of a family of silk farmers. It harshly criticized the market conditions at the time and comments on the folly of human selfishness. Yonggang's film The Goddess exposes very troubling issues through the story of a young sex worker trying to raise her son while at the same time being forced to submit to a gang of criminals. But the industry drastically morphed after World War II due to the emergence of the Communist Revolution in 1949. The Chinese Communist Party saw films not as art, but as important tools for mass propaganda. The film industry became severely regulated in terms of plot and characterization, and almost all previous films were banned. The Chinese film industry essentially remained this way up until present day, and in the late 1900s, the film industry was very much failing, and piracy in China was rampant and uncontrollable. In 1979, 23.9 billion tickets were purchased, and in 1993, that number dropped to 9.5 billion. In order to prevent the collapse of their film industry, they started opening up the country to a select few foreign films every year. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, and this forced them to raise the quota up to 20.
Let me explain first of all what this agreement does. In return for China's entry as a full partner in the World Trade Organization, the United States would gain unprecedented access to China's markets.
The WTO gave the Chinese government 10 years to prepare their domestic market to open up entirely. But China grew so powerful that it was able to circumvent the rules. So in 2012, instead of terminating their import quota, they renegotiated the number to 34.
The number is deliberately kept low. And in exchange for access, American film companies submit their films to China's censors, who often force them to change those films. American companies have learned this fact, and they'll often change the films even in advance of submitting. As a result, they control not just what audiences see in China, but also what Americans see.
For American companies in the global marketplace, free and fair competition with China has long been a fantasy.
In the period between 2002 and 2019, the US box office market grew from 9.1 billion to 11.4 billion, giving it an overall growth of 25%. In the same period, China's market soared from 5.4 million in 2002 to 9.1 billion in 2019, giving it an overall growth of 169,000%. In 2019, global box office revenues hit $42.2 billion US. This means that 27% of global box office revenue is earned in the US, while China controls 22%. In many cases, access to the Chinese government can easily make or break films. In 2014, despite abysmal ratings and a lackluster performance in the US box office, Transformers 4 topped the charts because of the support that it received from the Chinese government.
Everyone wants access to Chinese markets, so they're able to use that as leverage to basically bully companies, even movie execs, to produce the content they want.
The Chinese government are turning Hollywood into a propaganda machine by restricting access to a vital market, and they are able to do so because political leaders have allowed them to circumvent international trade laws. It was long believed that by allowing the Chinese government to participate on the world stage, that they would become more democratic. But the Chinification of Hollywood is just another example of how we were so very wrong.
What is the most intelligent thing we can do to increase the chances that China will become more open, more democratic, and a constructive member of the global community in the 21st century? I think the answer is to allow them in.
We are so used to an America-centric worldview in our movies, but you guys, it's very possible our kids are going to grow up with a different kind of cultural influence.
It's really fascinating.
So for China, Chinese government, the political structure of Chinese government might not be the best thing, but is the best thing for China, and we don't see any possible alternatives to the current government.
Hey guys, we put a lot of work into these videos, so please like and subscribe to support us.